Getting kids ready for authentic college-level work is something that Pioneer cares deeply about, and I think one of the things that Bob is bringing to us is that in some ways our commitment to education in this state is unique in the country, being housed in our state constitution since 1780, that many other states don't get that, and that there is a crying need for some movement across the country that accomplishes just what Bob is talking about. It's my honor now to have Taylor Branch, who is eager to get to the microphone, up at the podium. And just briefly, you all know his work. He is a masterful historian who has written the American, the King's Year trilogy, which we all are familiar with. He has continued to do a lot of work in that area. His latest book, released in 2013, is The King Years: Historic Moments in the Civil Rights Movement. In 2009, he wrote The Clinton Tapes: Wrestling History with the President. Branch began his career in 1970 as a journalist, staff journalist for the Washington Monthly, Harper's, and Esquire. He holds honorary doctoral degrees from 7 colleges and universities. Other citations include the Dayton Literary Peace Prize, Lifetime Achievement Award in 2008, and the National Humanities Medal in 1999. He lives in Baltimore, Maryland. Thank you very much for coming up.
Thank you, Jim. I'm really happy to be here with all of you. My last book is dedicated to students of freedom and teachers of history. So that's you. You need to rescue the country. And it's a very good start to listen to Bob Moses. It's a wonderful privilege for me to share the platform with him today. When Hollis Watkins, the young teenager who had heard rumors that there was an incredibly brave person daring to take black folks up to the courthouse in southern Mississippi, he sneaked in and peeked around, and he thought Bob was Martin Luther King, or at least a freedom rider. And in many respects, he is. He's a teacher. And if teachers need to rescue the country by rescuing the appreciation for citizenship and what's at the heart of we the people, they could begin by teaching their students that people like Bob Moses are around here who embody changing the country for the better against all odds by tenacious and imaginative engagement with the promise of what we the people means and where it comes from. If we could get every politician and every pundit to recite the preamble to the Constitution before they begin their program every day, they would recognize how unbelievably audacious and optimistic it is, and perhaps it would temper their instinct to cuss the promise of we the people implicitly every day. We are imprisoned in, to some degree, a psychological refusal in this country to recognize that race has always been at the heart of American history if you define American history as the struggle with what freedom means in the only country that was founded on the promise of freedom as an idea, not around a nationality that we all speak French. We are Americans. We are founded on the premise that is in the Constitution and in the Declaration before it. Because those struggles have always been about race, whether it was at the Constitution and the struggle of what would secure slavery and the essential compromises that are in the Constitution, and that already were approaching race when they did it all by euphemism, never once mentioning slavery in the Constitution. That heritage comes right down to us today. We discuss race by euphemism today. We learned how to discuss race by euphemism when I was a boy growing up, being taught in school in Atlanta, Georgia, that the Civil War had nothing to do with slavery. And you can take polls today of teachers, and not all teachers, in fact, in some cases a minority of teachers believe that the Civil War had to do with slavery. We believe what we want to believe. And that's dangerous if our history and an understanding of our history is central to citizenship, which is why, before going into this subject, I want to endorse your agenda to try to restore teaching of history, American history, as a standard in the schools, because since our history is the story of freedom at the heart of the constitutional promise, then some grasp of American history is essential to citizenship. And if the Constitution is premised on the notion that the country belongs to all of us and each one of us is equally responsible, whether you're a homeless person or the President of the United States, you all have an equal share. That's what made the Civil Rights Movement so powerful, is that Martin Luther King could put out to everyone the notion that they all had a stake in equal souls and equal votes, that it was the basis of both our secular and spiritual commitment. And his genius was that he could talk about church and state every day and never yet get attacked for mixing church and state, because he didn't try to subdue one with the other. He said, take it either way, equal souls or equal votes. Our most fundamental principles are embodied in the question of whether we understand our heritage and the promise of America enough to address equal souls and equal votes and what they mean. The truly remarkable thing about the civil rights era is that the people who were denied even the visibility inherent in the promise of we the people became the leaders in lifting the whole country to the true meaning, toward the true meaning of its own professed values. That Diane Nash, who couldn't vote in Alabama and was a Catholic student who could pass for white, but had refused to and been a leader in the Freedom Riders, that on the morning after the Birmingham church bombing, she decided it was up to her to present a plan to answer the Birmingham church bombing. A crime so heinous, the 4 little girls killed, marching out of the church where she had helped lead marches of children in Birmingham in 1963, so she felt responsible for it. She designed a plan to paralyze Alabama until it gave the right to vote to its black citizens, on the theory that that would be a reform of such magnitude that crimes like the Birmingham church bombing could no longer be sloughed off, as that crime was sloughed off. Her plan became the plan for Selma. She's not part of American history to recognize that ordinary citizens put forward plans to rescue and redeem the promise of we the people. And that politics is not always and should not always be merely what elected officials in high places say. It's an engagement between the citizens themselves who are responsible for the country and their representative leaders that is very complex, it's very profound, it's an intellectual challenge, which makes it a challenge for teachers, it's a spiritual challenge, it's a challenge for courage, and it's a challenge across all the lines that divide us. And race has been consistently the most important one. I asked Diane once, I showed Diane once a document that showed the FBI harassing her and people she knew in petty little ways that were common to that era. The linchpin phrase in every order in the FBI in that period was provided it causes no embarrassment to the Bureau, meaning if you can only do it surreptitiously. And I asked her for her reaction to that, and she says, oh, that's just Hoover, that's our fault. And I said, what do you mean it's our fault? These are really scurrilous, nasty things. And she says, well, we left J. Edgar Hoover for 50 years in a position of arbitrary and secret authority. And if you study the promise of America for 5 minutes, you understand that that's a formula for corruption, autocracy, and oppression. J. Edgar Hoover's our fault. So here is a citizen on the other side of the color line 50 years ago saying that J. Edgar Hoover is our fault because it is our duty to lift the country. So that's really the promise here that our students ought to get through American history courses, which is essentially the only way they're going to learn what it is to be a citizen and to have, on top of everything else we have. We face economic problems, we face family problems, there are plenty of stresses in America. But you can't escape the fact that you're also a citizen. And if you understand the value of citizenship, you'll understand the promise of what we can do. And the civil rights movement is a great, and ought to be, a great reminder that if we deal with the issues that divide us, most prominently in that issue, race, we can accomplish the most difficult task. We can work miracles. Race has been the stubborn gate to greater freedoms. If you dealt with race, then it opened doors for women. It opened doors for the disabled. It opened doors for senior citizens. It opened doors for the environment. It opened doors for gay citizens. The word gay wasn't even used then. All kinds of freedoms that we take for granted today changed the security, the optimism of every breath that every one of us draws in everyday life. And it didn't add that much to the oppressive nature of the federal government, but you would never know it by our discourse today. And a lot of that is because people are so reluctant to go through the gate of race as a way of understanding how these other freedoms work. That everyone who values opportunities for his or her daughter should be grateful to the Mississippi Freedom Democrats who opened doors in race, which indirectly taught people the meaning of equal votes and equal souls and started them wrestling with those other divisions, including the whole world. That the Civil Rights era is the time that the Immigration Act of 1965 passed and essentially recognized that equal souls and equal votes, we the people, applies to the whole world, whereas we had excluded most of the world from naturalized citizenship, tried to reserve it only for white people. As soon as people wrestled with the Voting Rights Act, within 2 months, the Immigration Act of '65 passed. President Johnson went to the Statue of Liberty and said, never again will the twin barriers of prejudice and privilege shadow the gate to freedom, and said no foreigner is too foreign to become a fellow citizen. And it has changed this country invisible in ways that we don't appreciate because we're not willing, through our politicians and even to some degree through our teachers, to go through those gates and appreciate how valuable the gates of freedom were opened again. And the reason that's important is because we need to go through that same process again to appreciate what we the people means, to understand the precious value that all of us has working in concert, that each of us has, to realize the promise in we the people. So we're still reluctant to claim the benefits of freedom because inevitably it means you have to deal with race. And most people who are sympathetic to race are still a little reluctant to do that because we're all a little reluctant to cross the boundaries that divide us. We need to get comfortable in doing that. When I teach civil rights history, I try to do the coursework, do the material, honor the heroes, frame things correctly. But one thing I always ask my classes to do is a small field project to simulate in a simple way the experience of civil rights as I understand it from studying and talking to people for over 35 years now, like Bob Moses, that you always have to take a step into the unknown and reach out to people across lines that divide you. So I ask my students, if they're the black forward on the basketball team, I ask them to do something like go to a Friday night service at a Jewish synagogue. Do something outside your range of experience with the goal of interacting with people across some cultural bounds. Spend the night in a homeless shelter. Do something that makes you uncomfortable, but then just as important, come back and tell this class what you learned, how you felt about it, how it made you feel. Because it is in the process of sharing that experience across cultural lines that divide us, that you get more comfortable understanding what it really is to be an American citizen, because we're all dealing with strangers. The whole promise of the American culture, what's embedded in we the people, is that we can be self-governing and that we can build public trust. And that's by wrestling with all these profound issues that Bob raised, of what equal citizenship means as applied to education, as applied to the economy, as applied to all the issues that face us. So I think history is central. Therefore, I think history teachers should be central. It was a terrible experience for me to go around the country after finishing my King trilogy. Gilder Lerman sent me around the country to talk to history teachers. The common experience that I got was that they feel beleaguered because, first of all, the budgets for schools are bad. Second of all, in most states, schools are measured by tests for reading and math, but not for history. So that if you're a really good history teacher, you get subtle pressure from your principal to switch over to teaching English. And not for nefarious or unworthy reasons, but simply for survival of the school. As citizens, I don't think we can afford that we really do need the history. But inevitably, in order to get to the history, sooner or later, every historian is going to have to say, start getting comfortable with the idea that it is going through the gates of race that we really understand American history, because that's all we ever did. That has been the gate to new freedoms, whether it's in the Revolutionary period, in the Civil War period, in the Civil Rights period. If you don't deal with race, you regress, which is in many respects what I think we're doing now with respect to constitutional understanding. If you do, you can advance. And in order to do that, you've got to become comfortable with being uncomfortable just a little bit and appreciate that as part of the legacy of being citizens. You study the Kennedy administration. He gave only one great race speech. His reputation in civil rights is overrated. Everybody knows that. However, his one great speech about race is not part of the canon of remembered Kennedy speeches. It's not Ask Not. It's certainly not Ich bin ein Berliner. That's what people remember. They don't remember we are confronted primarily with a moral issue. It is as old as the scriptures and is as clear as the Constitution. Equal soul. For that one moment, President Kennedy spoke like Martin Luther King and framed this issue. And he was dead shortly thereafter. Many people remember for Lyndon Johnson, they remember we shall overcome because a Southern drawling president adopted the motto of the Civil Rights Movement. But long before that, from the very first words out of his mouth on the speech of March 15th, 1965, he did something very important. I speak tonight for the dignity of man and the destiny of democracy. And he said, at times there comes moments when destiny and fate meet together in a single moment that shape a turning point in man's unending search for freedom. So it was at Concord, not far from here. So it was at Appomattox, and so it was last week in Selma, when Americans marched for the right to vote. And what he didn't say there was that there was not a single white person in that march in Selma. It was 600 black people who marched in Bloody Sunday for the right to vote. But what President Johnson was doing was putting them not only at the heart of the American promise of we the people, but he was putting them in the vanguard heart, in leadership, saying that all of us, white, black, Jew, Catholic, everybody, should recognize that if you care about American heritage, this is a moment when black people are leading American heritage to redeem its value, and there are leaders for all of us. That is that history in true perspective. It would elevate Diane Nash and Bob Moses somewhere up there around Alexander Hamilton if we had a true perspective on what America means. So that's, in my view, how far we have all fallen short in recognizing the promise, the burden, and also the promise of race and understanding American history and American citizenship, which is really about preparing our kids to shape the future if we really believe that America's constitutional democracy is the force that shapes us intellectually, mentally, and spiritually to grapple successfully with the future. Thank you.